I'm constantly struck by the fact that our narrative about medicine proceeds from an entirely false premise, which is that we know a great deal about the body and have all of these useful interventions. What we have is a lot of interventions where sometimes we know what one of their effects is. We very rarely understand why the spectrum of collateral consequences are what they are. And all of these systems are linked together, and nobody is tracking the long-term implications of anything. So we have this sort of obsessive focus on the things that you can detect on very short time scales, and almost a studied ignorance of what the same pharmaceuticals or procedures do to us long-term. Right. And we then,
I suspect if you did the statistics properly, I suspect that medicine, independent of public health, kills more people than it saves. I suspect if you factor in phenomena like the development of superbugs in hospitals, for example, that overall the net consequence of hospitals is negative. Now that's just a guess, but it could easily be wrong, but it also could not be wrong. And that is a good example, or that's where my thinking about what we don't know has taken me with regards to the critique of what we do.
The fact that it's even plausible is a stunning
fact. Well, medical error is the third leading cause of death.
Yep.
And that doesn't take into account the generation of superbugs, for example.
The generation of superbugs, or, if you're thinking broadly about it, I don't know where you stand on this issue, but I have been tracking the lab leak hypothesis for COVID, and it is very distressing to me that as much as it's an unsettled question, the evidence for the lab leak gets stronger over time. All of the competing hypotheses fall one by one and are replaced by some alternative that hasn't yet been falsified. But that's very ominous to me. And if this is the case, if this was a bug that was modified in the lab through gain-of-function research and escaped, then you have to add that to the balance sheet with respect to the costs of medical errors, because it looks like if this was an escapee from the Wuhan lab, that it was an escapee from experiments designed to create a vaccine to protect us from future coronaviruses. So we can't say that with specificity, but if we look at the circumstantial evidence of what was being studied, how it was being studied, and what the likely purpose of those investigations were, then this is, the mother of all self-inflicted wounds, and it is downstream of naive thinking about the cost-benefit ratio of enhancing the infectivity of viruses.
I did know that that's something that you've been tracking and pursuing. I don't have an opinion about it because I don't know enough about it to have an opinion. So I'd also, with regards to conservatism, I don't know if approaching how people should deal with the problems in their lives from a psychological perspective, the viewpoint of a clinical psychologist, I wonder if that kind of automatically makes you conservative in some way, because my locus of concern has always been the individual, and so and individual well-being, and being trained as a behavioral psychologist, I always took as my unit of analysis the enhancement of well-being, of health, let's say at the individual level, and maybe translated into political, and when that's translated into the political landscape, maybe that looks something like conservatism. I don't know. I mean, I never thought about this. I never thought about what I was doing in political terms to begin with. Like, even my initial statement about Bill C-16 and compelled speech wasn't supposed to be something specifically political. I just thought the political had escaped its boundaries. It's like, no, you don't get to infringe on free speech. You're no longer in the political realm at that point. That's a different realm. Get the hell back where you belong. That's how it looked to me. But, everything, that's another thing that's very peculiar about our culture at the moment. It's almost impossible to have a discussion about anything and have the coverage not be politicized. And I think that's partly a function of how the media, the legacy media work, because they tended to view everything through a political lens. and also a consequence of this insistence, and this I think comes primarily from the radical left, that everything is political. And I don't buy that. It's like, you can say that everything has a political aspect, but that's a completely different claim than everything is political, which is a totalizing claim. And I also, as a social scientist, don't like totalizing claims, because most things are multivariate complex. And so,
yeah, I think we can prove that you can politicize everything, but not everything is political. And that the tendency to view everything in political terms destroys our ability to properly navigate questions on which we actually ought to have alignment. And this is it's a very disturbing pattern to see every question, including COVID itself, turned into a team sport, because that is, of course, sabotaging exactly the ability to reason through our various options and then to get us to move in a coordinated direction to actually address the pandemic. And in some sense, I suspect we are headed to having to accept COVID as a permanent fact of the landscape, when that was not a foregone conclusion. That in effect, our politicizing of this issue is going to leave us with the bug that we can't ever get rid of.
Why do you think that? Like, I mean, I've been hoping that, and watching Israel in particular, there seems to be some indication that they've got the vaccinations ramped up to the point where they're having some effect on the rate of transmission of the virus, which is a positive thing. And, you know, I keep hoping that the vaccines are, there's enough of them and they're getting out there fast enough so that we might be able to keep the bug under control. You're not so optimistic about that, apparently.
No, I'm not, because for one thing, I know that it's been obvious from the beginning it was going to evolve, and that the key to managing its evolving out of our control was limiting the number of people who had it and limiting their ability to spread new variants around the globe. And we've done a terrible job of this. Somehow, a year in, it is only beginning to dawn on us that new mutants that are harder for our immune systems to recognize are essentially a certainty, and that the key to ever regaining control is to ensure that when these things arise somewhere, they don't immediately find their way around the globe. So I guess what I would say is, I think